in the serene town of Willow Creek. An unexpected accident at a bustling intersection sparks a tense confrontation, testing the boundaries of patience, respect, and human compassion. When the tranquil world of an elderly flower vendor collides with the haste of an impulsive driver, the sudden arrival of a powerful woman transforms the morning into an unforgettable event for the small town. Amid crushed petals and sharp words, the story unfolds hidden memories, profound connections, and ultimate surprises. But where will this conflict lead? What will become of the fate of the aging flower vendor? Stay tuned and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. In the pale light of dawn, the small town of Willow Creek began to stir awake. Birds chirped melodiously from the verdant trees lining the streets, heralding the promise of a peaceful new day. Yet, for John Miller, peace was a luxury he rarely experienced. The 70-something man bent diligently over the flower beds in the small garden behind his weathered wooden cottage. His calloused hands gently cradled each petal, meticulously binding together bouquets of roses, carnations, and lavender with slender twine. "These flowers must be perfect," he murmured to himself. "Customers deserve the best." His garden wasn't particularly large, spanning only a few hundred square meters, but it was tended with extraordinary care. The vibrant blooms stood out like a radiant splash of color amidst the simplicity and, at times, the hardship of his life. Every flower bore the patience and love he had poured into them, through sunshine and rain alike. Their delicate fragrance wafted through the air, offering a subtle reassurance that no matter how harsh life became, beauty could always be found and preserved. John lived alone in that modest house. His wife had passed away many years ago, and his only son, David, now lived with his own family some distance away. Every month, David would call to check on his father, often promising to bring him to live closer one day. But John always declined. To him, this small garden was everything. It was his sanctuary, his anchor, and a living memory of his late wife. Together, they had spent a lifetime transforming this once barren patch of land into a vibrant garden, flourishing with color and life. For John, flowers were not just a meager source of income, they were a source of joy and a way to remain connected to the world around him. Each morning, he carefully loaded freshly picked bouquets onto his old three-wheeled bicycle and pedaled to the central market of Willow Creek. To him, the market was not merely a place to earn a living, it was a social hub. A space where familiar faces greeted him and where conversations flowed like the breeze. The townsfolk all knew him as the Flower Man, a kind-hearted elder with a warm smile, always accompanied by the gentle fragrance of the blooms he brought from his cherished little garden. That morning, John woke up earlier than usual. The heavy rain from the previous night had left the streets damp and slippery. Carefully, he inspected each bouquet of flowers before securing them tightly in his bicycle's basket. Dewdrops still clung to the petals, glistening under the sunlight that peeked over the distant mountains. The road to the market was familiar, but today it was busier than usual. Cars zoomed past, the sound of horns and engines blending into the morning air. John pedaled slowly, carefully balancing his old three-wheeled bicycle. Each bump in the road made the basket shake slightly, the flowers swaying gently as if to remind him to be cautious. As he approached an intersection near the market, John spotted a sleek black car parked awkwardly across the narrow path. The street was too tight for him to maneuver around it, forcing him to swerve abruptly to avoid hitting the car. But his bicycle wobbled, lost balance, and then there was a loud crash. Bouquets spilled onto the pavement, their delicate arrangements scattered and crushed. In front of him, the black car now bore a long, visible scratch along its glossy surface. John froze, his hands trembling as they gripped the handlebars. His heart pounded, not from pain, but from sheer panic. What have I done? He thought to himself, his wide, fearful eyes fixed on the expensive car. The car door swung open, and out stepped a sharply dressed young man, his face twisted in anger. "What on earth are you doing?" the driver shouted, his voice laced with irritation. "Do you have any idea how much this car costs?" John quickly bowed his head, his voice shaky as he tried to explain. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. If you tell me the repair cost, I'll do my best to save up and pay for it." The driver let out a dry, mocking laugh, his tone dripping with disdain. "Save up? Do you really think those pathetic flowers can cover the cost of fixing this car? Ridiculous. People like you shouldn't even be on the road, bothering others." The words struck John like sharp knives, cutting into his pride and dignity. He stood silently, bending down to pick up the fallen bouquets. The once vibrant flowers were now wilted, their wrappings torn and dirty. A small crowd began to gather, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and pity as they watched the scene unfold. A lifetime of poverty. And now you're just causing trouble for others, the driver continued harshly. "If you can't ride properly, then stay off the streets." A passerby finally spoke up, their tone filled with sympathy. "Hey, take it easy on him. Can't you see he's an old man? Show some respect." But the driver, his chin raised arrogantly, ignored the plea. Age is no excuse to inconvenience others. He must take responsibility for what he's done. Amid the tension, a low but authoritative female voice rang out. "What's going on here? Why are you yelling at an elderly man like that?" All eyes turned toward the source of the voice. A woman stepped out of the SUV parked just behind them. She was dressed in an elegant cream-colored suit, her high heels tapping a measured rhythm on the pavement. Her sharp gaze swept over the scene, the expensive car with a visible scratch. The elderly man bent over picking up scattered bouquets, and the young driver still wearing a look of irritation. She addressed the driver with a stern tone. "What exactly are you doing? Why are you raising your voice at him? Is this how you handle a situation?" The driver hesitated, his voice dropping in tone as he stammered. "Ma'am, this old man scratched your car. I was just trying to handle it." "Handle it by humiliating an elderly man? Is that what you consider the best course of action?" she interrupted, her cold, piercing stare making him avert his eyes in discomfort. Turning to John, her expression softened, and her voice became gentler. "Are you all right? Did you get hurt anywhere?" John shook his head, his voice trembling. "I'm fine. It's just, I'm truly sorry for damaging your car. I didn't mean to. If you need it repaired, I'll do my best to save up the money to pay for it. I'll call my son." Emily bent down and picked up one of the crushed bouquets. Her hands gently smoothed out the petals as if she were touching something infinitely precious. For a fleeting moment, the sharpness in her usual gaze softened, and she seemed lost in a distant memory. As a child, Emily used to run after her father in the garden behind their home. He was a simple gardener, with rough but skilled hands. On sunny summer days, he would bend over the flower beds, carefully pulling out weeds or pruning the rose bushes. He always taught Emily to handle each flower delicately, as if they were fragile lives that needed nurturing. "My dear," he once said, his warm eyes tinged with a hint of wistfulness, "flowers aren't just beautiful because of their colors or fragrance. Their real beauty lies in their patience and hope. The soil might be barren, the weather harsh, but with care and trust, flowers will bloom." Emily remembered his words vividly, though back then she would only giggle and ask, "But why do you choose to grow flowers, Father?" Instead of doing something less tiring? Her father had paused briefly, then smiled, his gaze distant and contemplative. Because flowers bring joy. They're not just for us, but for everyone around us. You'll see, when you give someone a bouquet, their smile will be the greatest gift in return. But life was never easy. Their family was poor, and gardening barely provided enough to live on. There were times when her father had to sell flowers at painfully low prices. But he never complained or gave up. When he passed away, Emily stood silently in his garden, surrounded by flowers in full bloom. The memory of her father tightened her chest, filling her with an ache that she could not shake. Back in the present, as she watched John picking up the scattered bouquets from the ground, Emily couldn't help but think of her father. In John's stooped frame, she saw the image of an aging man who had once poured his entire being into tending his garden and providing for his family. "Are these flowers you grew yourself?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, as if afraid to disturb something delicate. "Yes. They're from my garden," John replied, his expression both bashful and quietly proud. Emily smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in it. "You don't need to apologize," she said firmly, her voice calm but resolute. "These flowers are beautiful, and I cannot understand why anyone would treat a hard-working man like you this way." Just then, the sound of a motorcycle echoed in the street. David, John's son, arrived with a face full of concern. As he stopped and took in the scene, his father bent over picking up scattered flowers, fear in his eyes. And the driver standing there with an air of arrogance, David's worry turned to anger. "Father, are you all right?" David asked, his voice urgent. "I'm fine," John replied, though his eyes were filled with sadness. "I scratched someone's car. I apologized, but they won't accept it." David turned toward the car and the driver, his face darkening with fury. "It's just a scratch, and you're making such a big deal out of it. This is my father. He's already apologized." "David!" Emily's voice rang out, commanding and authoritative. She stepped between the two men, her gaze calm yet firm. "Your defense of your father is justified, but you need to remain calm. Anger will not solve anything." David froze, her words settling over him like a cooling breeze, though his eyes still smoldered with indignation. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but my father doesn't deserve to be treated like this." Emily gave a small nod, as though in agreement with David's sentiment. Then, she turned to the driver, her gaze now sharp and filled with authority. Her voice was slow, deliberate, and carried a weight that could not be ignored. "And as for you, you work for me, but your behavior today is deeply disappointing. I don't need a driver who excels at technical skills but lacks respect and empathy. Do you realize that your actions not only hurt others but also damage my reputation?" The driver lowered his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I lost my temper. I'll learn from this." Emily nodded again, the harshness in her eyes easing slightly, though her tone remained firm. "Remember what I've said, if you continue to behave as you did today, you won't be working for me much longer. Attitude matters more than skill, and respect is something that cannot be compromised." The driver, now visibly uneasy, nodded in agreement, not daring to say another word. "This car is insured," Emily said, her tone softening. "The scratch is minor. There's no need to blow this out of proportion." The driver bowed his head again, speaking in a hushed tone. "Yes, ma'am. I apologize. I didn't mean to escalate things." Emily quietly observed John, The crushed bouquets in his hands reminded her of the times her own father had carefully picked up broken petals, preserving the fragile beauty they still held. A thought flashed through her mind, and she turned to John with a warm and friendly tone. "You don't need to worry about the car, it's insured. Instead, I have a proposal for you." John looked up, his eyes filled with curiosity. Emily continued, her voice gentle but carrying a sense of purpose. "I own a small flower shop. I opened it to honor my father, a man who loved flowers and dedicated his life to nurturing them. I think your bouquets would be a perfect addition to the shop. If you don't mind, I'd like you to supply flowers for my shop twice a week. What do you think?" John was so surprised he couldn't find the words to respond. You want me to supply flowers for your shop? But I'm just an old man with a small garden." Emily interrupted, her warm smile lighting up her face. "Your flowers aren't just products, they're a labor of love and devotion. That's something not everyone can offer. I believe people will adore them just as much as I do right now. If you agree, we can start as early as next week. Twice a week. You just need to deliver the flowers to my shop, and I'll pay you a fair price." David smiled and took his father's hand. "Father, this is an amazing opportunity. You should say yes." Emily smiled and reached into her elegant handbag, pulling out a business card. She handed it to David, her tone friendly yet meaningful. "If you ever need support with work or anything else, don't hesitate to call me. I'm always willing to help those with determination and kindness." David accepted the card, reading it with growing astonishment as his eyes landed on the words, "Emily Harper, CEO. Harper Holdings." He stammered, "I had no idea. You're the CEO of such a major company." Emily let out a soft laugh, her eyes gleaming with humility. "Don't be surprised. I've had my share of difficult days too. My father was a gardener, just like Mr. John here. He taught me the value of hard work and compassion. Today, I simply want to pass on the kindness I've been fortunate enough to receive." John nodded slightly, his voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you. I don't know what else to say except thank you from the bottom of my heart." "Then let your flowers do the talking," Emily replied, her eyes shining with genuine goodwill. Emily stepped into her luxurious SUV. Before closing the door, she turned back, her gaze sincere and full of warmth. "Mr. John, I hope your life will always be smooth and fulfilling. Take care of your health and continue living as beautifully as you always have. Your flowers don't just bring beauty, they carry hope and joy to so many others." The car slowly rolled forward, merging into the radiant golden sunlight of the morning. The shimmering rays seemed to paint iridescent streaks across the road. To those standing there, it was as if thousands of flowers floated in the air behind the car, a symbol of Emily's kindness and compassion. John watched as the car disappeared into the distance, a wave of gratitude and relief welling up inside him. "Do you see, David," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "there are still so many good people in this world. She didn't just help us, she restored our faith in humanity." David nodded slowly, his expression filled with respect. He realized in that moment that life wasn't just about responsibilities and pressures, it was also about kindness and the invaluable lessons we learn from chance encounters with remarkable people. That evening, in the small wooden house, David sat at the old table, holding Emily's business card in his hand. After a moment of hesitation, he turned to his father. "Father, she said I could reach out if I needed anything. Do you think I should try?" John looked at him in surprise before breaking into a gentle smile. "Why not? But remember this, you must work with your own abilities and integrity. No one can help us forever, but kindness will always open doors to new opportunities." The next morning, David called the number on the business card. After a brief conversation, he was invited to Emily's office for a meeting. His sincerity and positive attitude quickly won her over, and he was offered a position in her company. As time went on, John's life remained as simple as ever, but his eyes shone brighter each week as the flowers from his little garden were delivered to Emily's shop. David, meanwhile, grew not only in his career but also in his understanding of how to treat others with respect and empathy. The story of John, his bouquets, and Emily's compassion became a beloved tale in Willow Creek. It reminded everyone that in a chaotic world, kindness remains a timeless value. And if everyone sows seeds of goodwill, the world will grow more beautiful with each passing day, just like the flowers in John's garden, always blooming with love and care.